every election, there are complaints, reports in the press, same dynamics, year after year. The Democrats carry the state by gross fraud and intimidation. And here, in this article, you can see how at Elk Ridge they found a crowd of colored Republicans at the polls, fired upon them, and drove them away. In Tykesville, the roughs fired and scattered upon another crowd of colored voters. The deputy sheriff dared not serve the warrant issued for the arrest of the ringleaders, fearing for his life, and refused to call for a posse, fearing that greater violence would ensue. Ellicott City was visited by a gang from Baltimore, and so on. So Baltimore was always the locus, the center of the political violence, but it spilled over. Much of it very directly brought by Democratic gangs from Baltimore who they sent out to the counties. Keep black people away from the polls. Fire some gunshots. Scare them away. Meanwhile, here's Gorman listed as a presidential possibility, which he was throughout this period, 84, 88, 92. But I'm going to go ahead and editorialize and say, thankfully, never got the Democratic nomination. So the Democratic dominance of the state continued, but there were signs that more and more people were getting tired of it. In 1885, William Marbury ran for mayor of Baltimore. He had no backing from the Rosin-Gorman machine. He was one of those angry lawyers who's upset because, like a lot of lawyers, he believes that the law is supposed to function fairly. And yet in Baltimore, it kind of did the opposite. So he decides, I want to be mayor and straighten this city out. Of course, the Rosin machine mobilized against him, walking around money to get people out to vote, violence and intimidation to suppress the opposition. And so Marbury lost. He lost. But his attempt at trying to change the political system in Baltimore helped get more people involved in that effort. This is a historical fact that's always true. Things seem unchangeable until some people start trying to change them. And then other people can see, oh, maybe it is changeable. So Marbury's defeat led to the creation of the Baltimore Reform League. And the most important leader there was Charles Bonaparte. If you think you recognize that last name, you sure do. He's the grand nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. It was Charles Bonaparte and the Baltimore Reform League who worked on the same issue that Harvey Johnson and the Brotherhood were working on, which was trying to get new judges on the Supreme Bench. All that was here in this year 1885. And Bonaparte mobilized a bunch of prominent, respected white Baltimoreans in the Baltimore Reform League. And, they set about trying to expose the corruption, get the public outraged. Because public outrage leads to change, if it's harnessed properly. So, the idea is to, get people angry and then get that anger turned into votes for clean political candidates. Bonaparte himself did sometimes communicate with parts of the black leadership class, but for the most part, this alliance is like working together separately. You know what I mean? Like, they're working on the same projects, but they don't coordinate with each other. They don't talk to each other much. Is a really weird dynamic where, like, in Maryland, almost half the Republican votes were black people's votes, but the white Republicans don't ever want to acknowledge that black people are part of their party. It's tough. Tough being a black Marylander. So, also contributing to the growing reform movement was a new newspaper in town, the Baltimore Evening News, which was taken over by a new editor, or new owner and editor, Charles Grasty. He bought the paper 1891, started producing the new version of it in 1892. Grasty had been trained by this guy named Joseph Pulitzer. And Pulitzer, if you've ever heard of the Pulitzer Prize, this is who it's named after. Pulitzer operated on this revolutionary new idea of the press. This is going to blow your mind. That the press shouldn't be tied to a specific political party. Instead, the press should be interested in fact. I know, it's really weird. The press should be interested in fact and clean government. So you don't really side with a party, you side with those principles, and you support whoever is closest to those principles. The Evening News, with this new approach, became immediately popular with Baltimore readers. It was, within the space of just a couple years, almost as popular as The Sun, which is the #1 paper in Baltimore, has been for a long time. But the Evening News was now rivaling The Sun. It's the paper where people go to try to get this new thing that you sought from the press, the truth. As opposed to the way most of the press worked, which is, I realize as I'm saying this, the way that most of the press now works today, which is that it just reaffirms the narratives that people already believe. But the Evening News is going to shake up your narrative, because it might side with one party on one issue and a different party on another issue. Also, in this same period here, Harry Scythe Cummings really began to emerge as an important political leader in Baltimore and really the state. Cummings had been educated at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. No good college for him to attend in the state of Maryland at that point. So he went to Lincoln University and then attended Maryland Law School. Maryland Law School was briefly integrated. It was brief, 1887 to 1890. And during that time, Cummings became one of, I think, just 2 black graduates from Maryland Law School. He got his law degree in 1889. After that, it was closed to black applicants once again by John Prentice Poe, the dean of Maryland Law School. We'll talk more about John Prentice Poe later. He is the Poe that's in one of the key terms. So Cummings has his law degree from Maryland Law School, and by the time he obtained his law degree, it was now legal for black people to practice law in the state of Maryland. Thank you, Harvey Johnson and Everett J. Waring. So Cummings began practicing law in the city of Baltimore and also ran for the Baltimore City Council. He ran for office from the 11th Ward. And the 11th Ward was becoming increasingly black. Baltimore had very little residential segregation back when slavery existed. And even here in this period, there was a lot of work done to try to allow black servants to live close to the white families that they worked for. But black people who didn't work for white people didn't want them living nearby. So residential segregation had been moving much of the black population up to the 11th Ward. As a city, Baltimore is only about 15% black. But the 11th Ward became it hovered right around a 50% black district. Which means if Cummings can turn out those black voters and maybe get a few white voters in the ward to also vote Republican, because Cummings is a Republican, then maybe he can win. And he pulled it off, overcoming the violence of the Democratic ward leaders and the Democratic clubs. Enough Republican voters turned out, and Cummings became the first ever black member of the Baltimore City Council and the first ever elected black official in the state of Maryland. I'll remind you at this point that by this time there had been more than 1,500 black people elected from the states of the former Confederacy, including members of the House of Representatives, 2 U.S. senators, lieutenant governors, and here in Maryland, we have 1 member of the biggest city's city council. But in the context of Maryland, it was hugely significant. He was elected in 1890, re-elected in 1891. But because that district was right on the fence and you needed really good voter turnout, he lost his third race in 1892. But Cummings is not the kind of guy who's going to quit just because he lost one election. He continued to practice law, work with the Brotherhood of Liberty, and with Harvey Johnson, because he wants to get that darn seat back, and have a Baltimore city government where there's at least one black person in it that black people can go to. Also helping these organizing efforts was the first truly stable and successful black newspaper in Baltimore. John H. Murphy purchased this printing press for $200 in 1897. The paper had been established back in 1892, but the paper just kind of limped along until Murphy took it over in 1897. I guess maybe I should explain briefly that before this, ever since the end of the Civil War, there had been, I think, probably dozens of black newspapers by this time. They appeared and they folded. They appeared and they went out of business. As a black person in Baltimore trying to get some news from a black perspective, this was incredibly frustrating. And so to have a newspaper that now looked like it was going to stick around and be successful was a really big deal. And for the historian, the Baltimore Afro-American is just an invaluable source to try to understand the black perspective on what's happening during this period, late 1800s, early 1900s. And the reform movement, you know, the main goal, the way that you'd look at it in Maryland, was let's get rid of Gormanism. That's actually what they called it, Gormanism. These reformers, the Baltimore Reform League, the Baltimore Evening News, and Black Marylanders, were looking to somehow put this coalition where the white people don't really want to work with the black people, to put it together in a way that can get these corrupt Democratic politicians out of office. Would they be able to do that in the next video or two? I mean, we'll find out, I guess.